Welcome back. Time for this week's Capitol Report with Pat McGuigan of CapitolBeatOK.com. Pat, let's talk. I know we've talked a fair amount about Common Core, but there's more there to talk about. It's been an eventful couple of weeks. Update us and tell us about your interview with a leading Democratic critic of Common Core.
Yeah, Joe Dorman says that he believes the passage in the House and then in the Senate committee of a measure to repeal Common Core could be a tipping point in the national debate on the issue. It's interesting, Indiana's the one state that's repealed it, that says they're not going to use Common Core in their state curriculum. Now, having said that, there's some debate whether Indiana's repeal is aggressive enough in pushing back against the Common Core standards. Regardless of that, Dorman's done something kind of interesting. I think he's managed to bracket the issue right and left, because he's never liked the Common Core curriculum. He said so in 2010, voted against it. He reiterated that. Well, then he's very much making the case of some of the more liberal critics of Common Core, which is that it's a mandate without funding. It's a lot of new expectations without the following on material that would be needed to implement. Now, what it does at a bottom line analysis, at the very least, the legislation pushes everything back about a year in terms of implementation of new standards. And I think a strong case is made by Jason Nelson and Gus Blackwell, two Republicans who serve in the House with Dorman, that ultimately the standards will be as good or better than Common Core, but that they'll reflect an Oklahoma approach to all of the questions, including testing. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
I think the momentum is very strong for the critics in Oklahoma, very strong.
All right, we'll be watching that. Speaker of the House, Jeff Hickman, took over after session had started, been in that position now for a few weeks. What are your impressions?
They're good. My impressions are good. He's spends time with the press, and when he does, he answers questions. One of my criticisms of T.W. Shannon, who's very likable and a good person, is that his answers a year after he became Speaker sounded an awful lot like they did when he became Speaker. And what I'm describing is that he was still giving kind of political answers rather than the nuances that enter in when you're actually governing. Well, Hickman very much is doing that. In fact, Hickman shot back a little bit at some of the business-oriented critics on Common Core who are claiming that it would not allow the future farmers of America to be part of public education planning. And he said, well, that means they haven't read the bill if they say that, because the bill is very explicit in saying that the Department of Education can't do certain things. So that's interesting. You know, he's willing to push back a little bit, which is another sign of leadership. He is pushing for a tax cut, albeit part of the same package as the other state leaders, you know, not going to take effect until 2016. Pension reform, which is a tough one, because he's always been close to the public employees, but he's pushing for pension reform, meaningful pension reform this year. I could go on. Personnel, a couple of changes in chairman. I think a deft move, personally, was bringing Mike Reynolds into the fold rather than leaving him out in the cold by having him run the committee that looks at the way government is run. And of course, Mike will be very aggressive at that, and there's lots of early signs that I think that may set the table with things that need to be discussed. So I guess you could say I'm looking at a guy I think is a conservative on top of his game, maybe not as much rhetorical strong conservatism as some others, but he's governing as a conservative, and I respect what Hickman's about.
All right, very good. Well, on Monday, we know there are going to be thousands of people at the Capitol who aren't necessarily at the Capitol very often. There's going to be quite a rally there of teachers. What's their goal? What are you expecting? I mean, this is going to be a pretty big deal. It's
a pretty long laundry list of things they're asking for. One that's reasonable, frankly, is a rule, or might be a law. I'm sorry, I've forgotten. But it's a rule that they're supposed to fund education first, set the percentage, make that designation. I think the legislature's met that once
I believe.
Once in many, many years, 6 or 7 years since that was set as a goal. That's a reasonable proposition so that schools can be planning ahead for their budget cycle. Beyond that, one of the criticisms that's made over and over is that Oklahoma doesn't spend enough on public education, and there's various ways people look at the numbers. Candidly, being more on the conservative end, I look at the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs numbers as well as my own analysis, and it shows more like $12,000 per student than what is bandied around by the teachers' unions. They're claiming there's budget cuts. They're saying they need pay raises for teachers and there's too much testing. That last one I'm sympathetic on. On the issue of higher pay, 49% increase in administration since 1998 through 2011 at a time that there was a 6% increase in students. If you adjusted those numbers and admin had stayed flat in comparison to the number of students, you could provide a raise of several $1,000s a year for every teacher in Oklahoma. And I'm not sure that's the right approach. I believe in merit pay, but that's what the data leads you to. It'll be an eventful day on Monday, and they're sure gotten everybody's attention.
Yes, they have. All right. We'll talk more about that. And you can read more about these and other topics at CapitolBeatOK.com. For Pat McGuigan, I'm Alex Cameron. Have a great day.